Why Summoner is good for Final Fantasy XIV. Abridged. I understand this isn't a take shared by everyone. I'd just like to present a competing argument for your consideration that I hope is compelling. What is Summoner? In terms of class fantasy, summoners are a specialist type of mage that has mastered the ability to call on the concepts or memories of powerful magical constructs, and can wield this power in combat against enemies. In Final Fantasy XIV terms specifically, it's essentially a lesser form of creation magic, and the art itself dates to the Third Era, developed and reaching its zenith under the Allegan Empire. Along with Gunbreaker from that same era, it's one of the oldest job stones and powers the player character Warrior of Light has access to. Even detractors of Summoner largely agree that it very well succeeds in its class fantasy, and it takes inspiration from various entries in the Final Fantasy franchise. The primals are a lot like summons in Final Fantasy 3 through 9 and Tactics. The demis fighting alongside the player in combat are much like summons in Final Fantasy 12 and 13, and to a lesser extent, Final Fantasy 10. Though the player doesn't directly control them, the player does order several of their actions via off-global cooldowns, and the empowered attacks are vaguely similar to Clive's icon abilities in Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy XIV Summoner takes a little something from those various other incarnations of the job through Final Fantasy's history. What is Summoner's gameplay? Summoner's basic rotation is a 2-minute long loop, where you use a demi and its abilities, a 2-minute party buff Searing Light and its follow-on attack, and a 1-minute ability, Energy Drain, with an instant cast Rune 3 upgrade filling your global cooldowns, and then you use your 3 primals after the demi phase is ended in whichever order you consider best, along with their empowered actions, then a Rune 4 powerful instant cast, and finally a Rune 3 hard cast somewhere to close out the minute loop and see the next demi coming off cooldown. The loop then nearly repeats, though you don't use your 2-minute buff, and you want to use Energy Drain but hold the 2 Aether Flow charges and use them under the next Searing Light. There are a lot of elements you can move around and adapt with, for example, using Rune 4 during Ifrit if you need more movement. But this is essentially the rotation in general, simple, logical, and elegant in its execution. Alongside that, you have a personal shield you can use on yourself anytime you do not have a primal or demi out, and a combat raise utility ability. What Summoner does right. Summoner's design is elegant and intuitive, easy for players to understand, mostly what they are supposed to do correctly. Many players of more complex jobs don't just read their tooltips to learn their rotations. They learn openers and rotations from the balance, the forums, YouTube guides like Wescalbor or Keietsu Chaji's, at least the first time. And while the game still does not teach things like off-global cooldowns and weaving, Summoner's design, despite having ironically complex tooltips, is actually understandable to most players without requiring outside guidance. The modular boxes of the rotation work really well as a design that actually gives players agency and meaningful choice, while not completely throwing them in deep water without any idea of what to do, and without giving them so many right answers that choice has become meaningless. It is intuitive, which means the common man of gamers can pick it up and play it well. It isn't so rigid that minor errors are heavily punished, but it isn't so open-ended that there's nothing that can be done wrong. The signpost nature of the demis and primals keeps players on track as they move through the rotation, and keeps them mostly aligned with the rest of the party, with a nice little reminder that it should be about time to do things like use off globals coming off cooldown, and where the burst window should be. And the primals can give your brain a mini break when you need one to deal with mechanics, since you know what your next 4 or 5 cooldowns are each time you unleash one. These modular boxes reduce mental load while still allowing players choice as they move through the rotation. The job's rotation shows very clearly the design from the developers on how the job is meant to be played. There's no ambiguity on if you're supposed to pool things, if you're supposed to let things drift, if you're supposed to stutter step cooldowns, and so on. And the job having both a 2-minute damage buff and a clean 2-minute loop, unless you have insane spell speed, also clues players into how the job and game is designed to be played, with the 2-minute meta and party burst alignment. Finally, between its utility and the nature of its various abilities, it gives players a little taste of a lot of different types of abilities and gameplay. either just for variety while playing Summoner, or as a basis from which the player can think about what they enjoy most from those different playstyles, and springboard into other jobs that focus more on those specific things as the gameplay they wish to do. Between having hard casts, instant casts, party support, and even a 1-2 melee combo, Summoner showcases a lot of different parts of Final Fantasy XIV's combat design. A meta conversation about the game. MMOs need to have diversity of classes, both in how they play and in their complexity. An MMO is ultimately about the shared experience of a game with lots of other players. This means by their nature, they are at their best when they appeal to lots of different types of players and have a little something for everyone, so that they bring in and retain lots of different types of people and bring them together in a shared space. One thing WoW did very well, even from early on, was this. In vanilla WoW, there were very simple classes. By today's standards, they were all simple, but even at the time, there were super simple ones, but also more complex ones. In Molten Core, the Hunter class essentially just auto-attacked, since boss debuff slots were so coveted, due to being limited to about 8 debuffs at a time, they couldn't be wasted on things like Hunter poisons, especially in 40-man raids. And even its base arcane shot could overwhelm tank aggro in a world where combat razors were too important to use on a mere DPS. Frost mages, likewise, largely just spammed their base cast Frostbolt button, occasionally dispelling debuffs on various players. Yet both were able to participate. They were very straightforward healers in the game, like Paladin, with a very slimmed down but efficient healing support kit. But at the same time, there were some very complex, for the era, classes that had a lot of responsibility in the raid environment, between crowd control, debuffing enemies, and keeping a more complex rotation going while doing so. Warlocks had an important debuff to maintain, to disrupt and weaken enemy damage. Holy Priests had to use spell ranks as a sort of mana management tool, casting lower level ranked spells to get enough healing while not running out of mana as fast as their higher level spells would, while also knowing when it was time to use the more expensive spells to salvage a crisis situation. This was a sign of player skill in Vanilla and Burning Crusade. Even League of Legends has star ratings from 1 to 3 for its varying difficulty heroes, easy, medium, and hard, and any good fighting game like Smash Bros. Has a wide array of playstyles and character complexities. Even the simple-to-play Mario can be competitive. A good MMO has class design that ranges from easy to pick up intuitive, all the way to unintuitive theory crafter nightmares, and everything in between. Heterogeneity is good. Summoner isn't like any other job in the game. This is good as it allows more options for players, and attracts different types of players to the game. Obviously, I think it brings a lot more to the table, but what I'd encourage people to do is see it for what it is. Something different that has a lot of marks in its favor, instead of seeing it as something like taking the spot of Old Summoner, or a stand-in for them to impose their view of the game getting brain dead. You can critique those things, but you need not do so via Summoner itself. I know some people miss Old Summoner, but I encourage you to look at New Summer for what it is, not that it's taking the place of something else that you loved that the devs seem determined to remove anyway. I also encourage people to advocate for the things that have playstyles they want. Maybe the devs will be convinced with time to add more jobs to the game, and give some of those playstyles back to players. Call me an eternal optimist, I suppose. I personally always oppose things being removed from the game. For any fans of the Sword of Truth series, I prefer additive magic to subtractive magic. Adding to things, not taking away. No matter how many people like a change, there are always people who had a thing they enjoyed that was taken away from them. In my perfect world, New Summoner would have been a new job added, perhaps Evoker. 6.3 Paladin would have been a new job added with old Paladin's playstyle retained in the game. 5.0's Warrior and Machinist would have been new jobs added instead of replacing existing ones. You get the idea. But we are where we are, and we do have to move forward from here, as I don't think the devs are going to revert the Summoner change, and I think everyone does realize this, even those who don't like it. Summoner's good to have in the game and brings good things with it, but it's also only one piece of the puzzle of a good MMO. There are other pieces, and those are what we as players should be advocating for. More meaningful choices in jobs, more heterogeneity instead of homogenization in rotations, gameplay that feels more diverse across jobs, less encounter design that is more complex and difficult at the expense of job design. I personally don't like Black Mage, for example, but I never argue against it because I see it as having value to other people, and I realize its diversity is good for the game, and I want those people to have a job they can enjoy playing in this shared game space too. Todos juntos, all of us together. I do think there are some things about Summoner that could be improved. Physics scaling off of Intellect, Solar Bahamut simply replacing and upgrading Bahamut so we don't have 3 Bahamuts in a row now. Shiva, Ramu, and Leviathan added to the game, even if they were just reskins of Titan, Garuda, and Leviathan. And I do recognize that there are various reasons that people dislike Summoner. For example, the aforementioned people that believe it replaced old Summoner, some people thinking that the game is too easy brain dead and using Summoner as a representative of that, and some concerned about trends such as modulination. I do believe there is probably a very small amount of people that may believe that easy jobs should not be viable in difficult content, but I do believe that this is a relatively small portion of the player base that opposes Summoner. But I really just want to make some arguments here for why I think Summoner is good for the game, and good as a job, and have a discussion with people about that, as I do think it's a very important discussion at this point in the game's history. Thank you for listening, and even if you disagree, I hope you got something out of this discussion. Feel free to agree or disagree in the comments, or say nothing at all. I'm never going to be a big channel, so engagement is irrelevant, but I do believe this is a discussion worth having. Good day to you all.